So that concludes the complete scope of the consumer experience framework. Again, starting with process, because process is going to be your foundation, and then from process, as establishing that foundation, you can expand to determine what type of resources and how your resources is going to impact your consumer experience, because you want to the resources are directly related with as far as cost is concerned. Typically, the higher your resources, whether those be human resources or whether those be raw materials, typically the more that they're going to cost, but typically a lot more effective that those resources are going to be. We've talked about perception and how if you can control the perception of your brand, you can kind of sway people's consumer experience to your advantage, and how sometimes individuals get their perceptions about your brand from outside forces, particularly online, because a lot of data is prevalent. They go to ratings or review websites, and without even knowing anything about your brand, they can those ratings or other people's experiences can kind of create a predisposition to other individuals and influence their perceptions. So we kind of try to talk about effective ways that you can control your brand through marketing. We've talked about the product and how the product is important, how the product can negate or mitigate certain predispositions or previous experiences with your brand. And finally, we did talk about interactions and how interactions affect the consumer experience, and how you can be proactive and reactive, and how you can use those measures in terms of establishing or maintaining the desired consumer experience metrics that you would like. So your consumer experience should have a means for data collection of each of these domain areas: process, resources, perception, product, and interaction. So you should be able to collect data from each of these areas so that the domain performance can be quantified and measured. And what I mean by that is, anytime that you have when you're running an operations or you have a business, and if you're going to query your customers in regards to, and specifically I mean your ideal customers, your target customers, because again, we've talked about how you can have various customers. You can have those interlopers, those people who aren't really necessarily, you don't necessarily consider them a part of your customer base, but they still get their services or goods from you. But you want to query your consumers, your ideal consumers. Often, number one, you want to identify who those consumers are when they do business with you, and then you want to query them. But when you query them, you want to have questions. You want to devise your surveys in a manner that it kind of touches upon. You can get an idea of how you're doing in each of these areas. You don't want to just ask them, well, how good did we service you? How, because most people just focus on the customer service, the interactions. We call them interactions, but customer service is a part of those interactions. You don't want to just focus on asking questions about how did we do as far as customer service? How did we treat you as far as customer service? You want to also ask questions about, like, how did you like the product? How was the product? How did the product? You want to ask questions that give you metrics and information around a product. You want to ask too about the perception of the business. How did we, what's our appearance? What did you think of our business when when you first encountered it? What did you think of our business when you was either in the store or online? And then you want to, ask those, you want to ask those questions like, how difficult was it to navigate? How intuitive is our business? How's the setup? You want to ask various questions about that, or you want to establish focus groups that gather that information. See if you can find consumers who are willing to participate in focus groups, and you can see, specifically when you're dealing with websites, because now that goes into like the user experience of your website. You want to see what are the trouble areas that you do have. What are you doing well as far as in perception or interactions? What are you not doing well? What are you doing well as far as the product, and what are you not doing well? And in terms, you can determine how good you are with your resources. You can ask resource-based questions, but sometimes you can get the resource information. You can glean that information from basically your interactions or your your brick and mortar setup, if you have one, or your website or your product, because your resources kind of feed into all of those. So sometimes that area you may not be able to ask direct questions about, but from some of your survey questions, when you go in and you do your data analysis, when you sit down and you analyze the data, you can start asking those questions, those why questions. Why did we get a score in this? And sometimes you can you can come up with theories or suppositions, right? In regard, or, you can kind of notionally rationalize some of the information that you've gotten back as far as resources are concerned. But then you can also directly ask those questions about process. How is our process? You can ask the consumer, process-based questions like, and determine, is your process set all right? Because it may come to find out that your point of sale isn't as effective as it could be. Maybe, you have 3 points of sale within your business, but the lines aren't intuitive, or your checkout or check-in process isn't as effective as it could be. One example that you can see, the check-in, check-out process going to a different level are these new Amazon Go stores, where there's strictly no point of sale. It's just individuals walk in, they check in with their Amazon Go app. And I've actually been to one of the stores in New York, and I thought it was a fantastic concept and store. The prices are a little bit more pricier, but it was a great experience to just be able to go in with log into the app, walk into the store, pick items up off of the shelf and throw them in a bag and walk right out. And so so you're going to have to probably start doing metrics on how is my check-in and check-out process, or just how is the process period, whether it be online or whether it be a direct process store. So that's what we're saying about collecting metrics. You don't want to just collect metrics about, how your customer service went. You want to ask questions about the entire business. And I'm pretty sure a lot of people have, every time you go to a store or every time you call a help desk, if you ever take one of those surveys, you'll see they don't just ask you questions about the customer service rep or the sales rep that you dealt with. They ask you questions that kind of cover other process areas or other domain areas within the consumer experience, because they want to know where they can improve at. And then also, secondly, data collection should take all CX domains into consideration, and we just talked about that. For example, customer queries should contain information that can be applied to all of the respective CS process areas, and we just covered that as well. Finally, once you've gathered data, because this is kind of touching back on the process area, and we've talked about the process area and how important it is. And one of the techniques within the process area that helps the process area improve are establishing benchmarks, establishing metrics, right? And also establishing what information we're going to collect. And this is a part of data analytics. And this data analytics plays into improving the customer experience, because as you analyze and capture data, and as you're capturing not just data, but you're capturing the right data. Because if you're capturing all of the wrong data, it's not going to tell you anything about your organization. That's why it's good to capture the right data and analyze the right data so that you can move forward with your business. But you're going to kind of go through a project management type of maturation process for improving your business processes and improving your consumer experience to kind of create that consumer driven enterprise that you would like. So a lot of times when you're initially starting a business, you should start sequentially as we work through, such as process, resource, perception, product, and interactions. Work it through that model. But once you're into production, once your business is up and running, not everything is going to be sequential. But what you should do is routinely capture information. You should be routinely capturing information. You should be routinely querying your customers, giving those surveys and gathering feedback, and not just gathering the feedback from the customers through surveys and or focus groups. I think focus groups are great to incentivize your customers through either discounts or free goods or services. but to have them participate in live discussions with you and give that honest feedback to your organization. But then what you also want to do too is you want to talk to the people who work within your organization, who actually have boots on the ground, who are in the trenches, and they're actually working these specific processes. And you want to kind of get those individuals into a room. You want to probably have your strongest people, what you would probably consider your subject matter expert. If this your subject matter expert that's working the cash register, or if they're in the sales department, or if they're in the returns department, if you have that special return, or if they're in the IT help desk department, whichever departments are being impacted, you want to gather that feedback from these individuals, because they're the ones that's working with the customers, and they can kind of tell you what they see working for the business, and they can also tell you what are the opportunities for improvement within the organization. And you want to take all of this information, capture it, and then you want to take it back to the process level, because now you're working back at the process level again. And then you want to say, now we've gathered this information from internal people within our organization who actually see what's going on with the customers. We've gathered this information from the customers. And then we also know what our funds look like. We know what we can and can't do as far as from a resource perspective. So now let's put it together and let's kind of do some refinement of our current processes, because this is where we're at now, and these are the tweaks that we want to make. And then you can go in, make the tweaks that you need to make, and you can make those refinements, whether it's improving some of the materials that go into your product. If let's just say you're a restaurant, a fast casual or fast dining place, and maybe it's some of that feedback is just required to improve some of the ingredients or improve some of the formulas that you have for your food. And you just have to find out how you make those improvements, because then it's going to impact some of the foods that you eat. And then maybe it impacts other food lines. So then you're probably going to have to consider where those impacts are, and then see and make those changes accordingly, or to see if those changes are worth making. Similarly, if you have a product or a service-based business, you see which product lines you can or cannot improve, and you make those improvements accordingly. So you're improving those resources. Then you can also say, well, okay, based upon this feedback, do we need to do any marketing to, is our reputation damaged enough where we need to rebrand ourselves, or we need to do some kind of marketing and promoting online of ourselves to improve our perception? Or do we need to pivot and change our perception and pivot towards this new concept of not being cool, but maybe focus on being serious and being professional? So these are certain things that you need to think about. And then now you're impacting your process and so forth. And then you can implement techniques for possibly changing your interactions with your customers. Maybe you change the way customers interact. Maybe you change the way or change certain scripts that you write for your employees. Like I go to businesses now. This is one example. I go to a fast, I guess they call them fast food restaurants now, fast casuals, I guess, some of them. But I noticed that all of the young kids, and these are young kids, I'm talking about high school age kids. Every time I go to this place, those kids, I say thank you, and they don't say you're welcome. And that used to be the old term, right? You used to go when you went to a place, you say thank you, and then everybody's natural response is you're welcome. But these young kids are now saying my pleasure. So obviously, from the organizational perspective, someone schooled them to say, this is the script. We're not going to say you're welcome. You're going to say my pleasure. Someone had to get that and kind of preach that and say and give that script and say that this is the standard that we provide here. It's not your welcome, but it is our pleasure. It is our pleasure to serve. And they kind of ingrain that into their employees. I do believe that's just my theory. And maybe not. Maybe these young kids are just now saying my pleasure, but I've just noticed that at some of the organizations or businesses that I'm now attending. Also, another thing that I've noticed, but this change has happened probably maybe 7 years ago. It could even be 10 years ago. People back in the day, if I remember, I was born, I was born in the 70s, so I guess I can say that. But I remember going shopping, probably like 80s, 90s. And if you walked out of a store, let's just say the cash, if you went to a retail store, and let's just say either you forgot a good or you got too close to the door, or maybe if the sales rep forgot to take the sensor tag off of the clothes, if you got to the door, it was a loud beeping sound like bam, 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 and it was kind of very intrusive. It almost made it seem like you were trying to steal something. Just the sound. It was a sound like a fire alarm going off. It just wasn't and I guess maybe you're equating, or I'm equating that sound with something negative. But now you've seen a lot of stores, they've gotten away from that loud glaring sound to now it's a softer bing. It's like a soft tone bing. And it's like, your sensor is still on your item, and it's more of not accusing you of trying to steal, but hey, the sensor is still on the device. Please go back to the register. And these are just little changes. And it may not seem big, but these are big consumer experience changes because they change the way you feel. Now that loud glaring sound, it's not as embarrassing or putting a spotlight on you. It's more of a softer sound, and it's more of them not accusing you of stealing, but hey, the item still has a sensor on it. Please come back and see us. So these are just examples of how people make continuous changes to their businesses, and you want to so that because the ultimate goal is for the customer to have an outstanding experience or the best experience possible, so that they continue to come back to your brand for whatever particular needs that you can provide to them, or services or goods. And that's what it's ultimately about. It's about you creating a great consumer experience for your consumers so that you can service the community. And, it's not just about you being profitable, because ultimately that's the goal for all businesses. Yes, it's about being profitable, but it is also about being recognized in your community as a place associated with positivity, about being helpful, and about being a good steward within the community that you're serving. And that's what it's ultimately about. So with that being said, you've reached the end of this lecture. I do appreciate you taking the time to sit here and listen to me talk about the consumer experience, and participating in my masterclass on the consumer experience, customer experience, CX. I do have other class offerings that are out there, and I do appreciate you taking the time. And it's also, I'll use the word as well, it's been my pleasure developing this. This is something that I love to do. I love to share my knowledge, and I hope that it's helpful to you. If it hasn't, please write me and let me know where I can improve within this material, as well as other offerings that I do have. And again, my name is AJ Smith, and I am the co-founder and chief executive of Baca Strategies. We are a business analysis quality assessment organization, and we do help with IT project management, process improvement, and data analytics, as well as customer service. So, and the consumer experience. So, again, thank you. It's been a pleasure delivering this class, and I look forward to working with you in the future.